I think the problem is that we're often dealing with this blank chat box now, and it's hard to know, like, how can I make that useful to me? I think if you're in like humanities, it could be a great starting place, like Google is, in terms of like using deep research and you're trying to figure out a topic and you're like, research this for me for a while and then I'll come back and read that and let that be your first place to go down rabbit holes. I think your curiosity really is your best asset, and it won't be curious for you. Like, it can search a lot of things and it is curious, it's figuring them all out. But then when you're reading something, you're like, oh, that's really interesting. Can I go deeper into that? Like, you're the only one who has that North Star. And I think you should trust those instincts, and it's not going to replace them.
Welcome to PHOR, Modern and Digital Humanities. This is where academia meets real-world impact. We source work and discourse in disciplines such as anthropology, art, design, film, philosophy, sociology, psychology, and philology, just to name a few, and focus on how these disciplines intersect with technological growth and modern-day society. Okay, let's get into it. Yehezkel Lipinsky is the definition of a multi-hyphenate mind. He is a designer, product maker, community builder, systems thinker, and so much more. He presently works at the New York Times as a product designer, creating design systems and features for its newsroom. What I personally love about Yehezkel, and also one of his greatest strengths, is the depth of empathy, care, and passion that he puts into his work. He's truly one of a kind, and we're so happy to have him on air with us. Yehezkel, welcome to the show.
Excited to be here.
Could you give us some background on why you decided to pursue design and how it evolved into what you do today?
Yeah, I do really love design. I remember I got into design, I think it was like grade 10 or 11. I had this like layout. I was in like a computer class and we learned how to use Adobe InDesign, and I like happened to just be like very good at it. It was like very energizing. Design for me was always just like very playful and fun and kind of didn't feel like a job. That's a hard feeling to hold on to as you make it a job. But it was very like fun, and I started doing more layout things and I just really loved it and gravitated to it. I ended up going to like a regular liberal arts university and then switched into art school and advertising design, and like learning that everything around us is made by someone, which is really not an obvious thing, right? Probably definitely in the last decade has become more obvious to so many people. And I did that for 4 years in my undergrad. And then I didn't want to go into advertising at the time. It felt like a career that really wasn't clear on where it was going. I didn't really love also how it like treated people. It seemed like it was hard to be, at least from that vantage point, it was hard to like take parental leave and come back to the career. And also just felt like a career that didn't really know where it was going. I mean, the digital revolution, as you could say, was like really changing it up. And I was like, I'd rather be in a career that has a bit of a focus to it. I didn't know about this whole world of innovation consulting. I never knew that existed. My advertising professor introduced me to this firm that I've worked at that was really incredible called Idea Couture. I didn't know that big Fortune 500 companies, they're being disrupted and they have to think about how do they kind of disrupt themselves or think of new businesses. And that is what innovation consultancies do. And I didn't know about this. And I was very lucky that I would talk about Idea Couture. It's a very special place that I'm like at my desk, I'm like, on my left is a behavioral psychologist and on my right is an anthropologist. And it really was that way, an anthropologist and strategist. And my title was half futurist, like half strategist, basically, with fancier terminology as my title. And it was pretty incredible to see like this in-depth research and this in-depth thinking about the world there. And this brings me to how I started thinking about my career. Someone I worked with there who I really loved, Kathleen Bacola. She mentioned about seeing the design field, the whole like kind of services design field as really upstream and downstream. And that like kind of studios and agencies and work really exists on that continuum. So really upstream is the question of like, maybe what is the future? Who are our customers? Who are we selling to? And then when you go downstream, it's like, what is the problem? What is the idea? We're addressing the problem. How are we solving the problem? We've solved the problem and this is the app. How do we then sell the app? How do you market to people? What are the advertisements you're seeing to do it? So you may be in the early stage of like trends consultancies being like, what even in the future? Anthropologists, behavioral design firms that are like, who are we selling for? How do they work? What are the needs that have to be solved for them? Then have studios being like, what could we design for them? And then maybe more app development agencies that are like, okay, let's make the thing for them. And advertising studio really downstream being like, okay, how do we sell it to them? And I kind of wanted my career to move more downstream. I was so upstream that my questions that I was answering earlier in my career were, what is the future? Who are the people we want to think about? And then we maybe not even pitch ideas, but opportunity spaces. What are some of the thematic areas that you could be making ideas within? And I was like, no, I want to make the ideas. And then when I switched to my next consultancy, it was really, they were more about like, you figure out who the customer is. And then you're like, what is the one idea we're going to we're going to end with one idea. And we're going to test out a few ideas, but we're going to end with one that feels proven that this company should then pursue. And they were doing that more. And then I've gone even more downstream in my career right now, which is not even like what, I mean, it is about what is the idea, but then it becomes like, how do we make the idea? And I went into that because to me, that's where really the rubber hits the road. And as much as it's really fun and exciting to think about these bigger questions, I like seeing my work out in the world being used. And if not, I get really sad. So that prompted me to go in-house. And at first I started working at the Times in NYT Cooking. I actually was making software for our food editors, so the publishing software for them. Then I went actually working on the consumer side, so on the homepage of NYT Cooking and the recipe pages. And I switched now to the publishing group where we work on workflows for the whole newsroom and also all the newsrooms at the time. So Wirecutter, Cooking, and helping all of them like think about how their editors work and how to make tools for those workflows. And I think what's really nice is that like I love talking to editors and people working in publications and like seeing how they work and how they make things happen. Then being like, how can we make tools that make that easier or more interesting or get them to focus on what they really need to focus on. And so that's kind of like where I am actually a lot more downstream right now. And I think we'll see where I land. I also like thinking about like what is the problem and what could be the product be, and then actually making the product and like how I spin that kind of space. And as I progress my career, I think is going to be the big question.
It's incredible to hear the journey that you've been on and the evolution of it too. As a person who has used human-centered, humanity-centered, and service design methodologies extensively, could you briefly explain these concepts and how have you seen these disciplines evolve alongside current technology and now AI? Where do you think these disciplines are heading?
Yeah, this is a big question. So human-centered design is that we're designing like based on people's needs. I think I've sometimes seen the word humanity-centered design as not really just for human needs, but for like kind of tethering it to society. I remember when I was more in like design strategy world, now I'm more in like digital product design. But when I was in that world, like you can still design something for human needs, but it might not be in like the best interest of humanity necessarily. Like you might uncover needs that of how people spend or how people manage their healthcare, but it might not. If you're thinking a bit more holistically, it's like, are we addressing deeper injustices or are we bettering society through how we're, selling our services or designing services for people? Service design is probably the clearest thing that has an industry around it and also has, I think, it's still used in the work I do in digital product design, which is basically helping understanding like how people use services and where those needs start and end. And sometimes, you're like, oh, I go to the bank and take out money. But when you take a step back on that and, start mapping out from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, you might learn that there's a lot more nuance or a lot more things going on inside you as you're in different steps of it. And then as you kind of map that out and draw that out and then think about how I'm experiencing it and then how the service I'm using responds to how I'm using it, what happens on their end that I don't see, you're able to maybe make a better experience when you kind of can untether all those things together, and then you put them back in a way that hopefully is actually a better experience for both the business and for the user especially. And then the AI, we have to talk about that, right? I think it's hard to know right now. I think things like AI might make it easier to synthesize what you get, but I think things like service design, you need to be like talking to humans, seeing how things work, and AI is really good at knowing what's been already captured, and sometimes service design, you're really getting the idiosyncrasies of how people use things and then how businesses work. If that's not captured anywhere that AI can like read it, like it won't know these things. And humanity-centered design, I think we've probably not done enough humanity-centered design for AI to have like a corpus of knowledge to do that well. And human-centered design, I think it's hard to replace like original, like going out into the field, really talking to people. Again, synthesize all that stuff, but I think getting the raw data is definitely still, I think, a very human act.
That's a wonderful answer. Thank you. When it comes to people versus the technology they're using, where do you think that line is? Like, do you think that we are going in the right direction in terms of going to enhance a designer's abilities, or do you think there could be limitations, or how would you speak to a fellow multidisciplinary designer or creative in that sense?
Generative AI allows us to almost like never start with a blank page. But I think right now we almost have a different blank page, which is like, what do you put into this chat box that you'll get good results from. And I learned that from like podcasts or people writing in articles of like what they do. So actually, interestingly, and I think in maybe things that are more diffuse, it's maybe harder to use AI. So we talk more about strategic design, and we talk about that design has kind of two layers of process. So there's oftentimes where you're diverging, that you're really thinking bigger. You're seeing like, what could the ideas be? How could we address this? What even is the problem? And then there's converging, there's convergence. So it's like, okay, we understand the problem. What does it mean to like start solving the problems we're thinking a bit more narrowly about like, how do we address what we're really trying to solve? I think in design disciplines that are really about divergence, which strategic design was for a lot more of the time. I mentioned that I spent a lot of time interviewing people out in the field and figuring out insights. I'm unclear of how much generative AI helps necessarily there. I think it can help come up with questions, but I think it's still going to be like limiting. But as we find out all that data, it's probably really great at synthesis. And then as you're starting to deal more with definites, you're like, okay, we're going to make an app based on what we do, because there's already so many tried and true like paradigms and mental models of how apps works. I think it's really good at like being a good critic and like being like, have you thought of this? Because it's working in like defined mental models. So one way I've used it is being like, here are my screens that I've designed, like critique them. And it can be really good in that. I think as a designer though, doing like actually design with it, one thing that I haven't really done much with it and is just tough as a designer is knowing that generative AI has been built on kind of maybe stealing from a lot of design. That's a tricky thing as a designer of how much do we use it to physically like design things. So like when I see designers use it to borrow different styles or make cool things with it, like can it do that just because it's like taken these styles? How does that, and maybe that's something we'll just get over or is going to push us to do differently. I think some interesting ways of using generative AI is like giving it a style like that you've created and then being like, can you make more of this? Or can you do different versions of this? And that could be really interesting. And then maybe you as a designer are doing like way more than you could have done, like icons in like the style you first did like 5 icons in. And then you're more of an editor, you're more fine tuning it. I could see that happen more. I saw Pentagram did a project like this that they had. I think they maybe gave it a style and then it did tons of them. I think in the design world, people thought it was taken away from designers actually doing that job. And that's, I think, a fair critique. But I could see that being part of like, especially if you're working on like a lot of assets, it being something that could like do the first pass and then designers are going in and, really making it sing.
It's so interesting what you said about you on Photoshop and like that same feeling of like wonder and discovery is maybe just like a little less than maybe how it felt a little while ago. The design culture within New York. Is there an exhaustion with this stuff or is there an excitement? Is it a mixed feeling? Where do you think the sentiment exists in this current moment?
I think it's tough. I think it depends in like, I think there's like a usefulness scene, but also like a hesitation is not like full techno optimism. And I think that's a fair response to have. I get a little techno optimist about it that I'm like, I think it's exciting to be excited about these things, but it's also like, can we be critically excited? Can we be like, this is useful here? It might not be the answer to things. One of my things with like, I'm not a coder, but with people who really successfully code with AI, they might just be really good at it because they have such an understanding of code already. Like they're able to say the right things really descriptively. Like I can do with design. Like when I'm in, Figma Make is the generative AI design tool that I've been using a lot in the last few weeks. Like I'm able to, not that I necessarily spend the time to write it so well, but I'm able to like pinpoint what I want done pretty precisely that like maybe just because I'm a designer, I'm able to do. And it might be the same in other professions. And I think we'll kind of see that like, that if you're the profession that's able to talk in a language that is precise, that AI is able to leverage, you get really good results probably. Yeah, I think we're going to be in a season in the next probably few months where it's going to be like, how much is this benefiting? And at the same time, we'll probably have a lot of industry pressures to have it benefit a lot. And there's a part of me that sometimes finds it like a lot of wasted time. I mentioned using Figma Make a few months ago. I really didn't like feel it was so worth it and great. And now it's incredible. So I feel like we're in this, I think I read somewhere that like we used to be in this like more optimization era. Now we're like an experimentation era again. I think one of the hard things about software is that we've been in this experimentation and optimization era. We see that already with like, people wanting you to use their product. I see with like ChatGPT, it will never just end an answer. It will always be like, do you want me to do this now and this now? And like Photoshop, going back to that, never did that. I made a file, I closed it. It wasn't like, wait, do you want to make something else? No, never did. But like growth, probably pushes that to happen more. And I think us learning for me, I'm just like, thank you for giving me this question, but obviously I'm not going to take you up on that. And I don't know how many people are doing that. Maybe they're always like taking the next question and using it. And I think we're going to learn like our natural stopping and starting points when we bring in these tools into our work.
Awesome. For the humanities student out there, for the person that is an artist, for the person that's a writer, for the community leader even, for that person, like how important is it to explore coding or new technology, digital processes like such? How important do you think that is?
I think it depends what you're doing. I think, at least in the world of AI, like I think there's a lot of things that can be made easier right now. If you're like an artist and doing a little bit of like the grunt part of art is like reaching out, it's really helpful to be able to massage that message. Or maybe you do a first pass and it's just funky and it can really make it sing, which is an incredible tool. I think community building is something I think about a lot. Like there's a lot of tasks to get to the exciting parts of like being in community. And I actually really think that AI and AI agents, if done right, could really help with that. Sending out the emails, responding to people, and like responding them with like the regular questions that people have, like when does this event start, or where is this, or is this even like really important things of like, is this accessible? Like this takes a lot of community leaders' time to respond to these things, and it might be that these can be done quickly, or even just like it gives you a first draft of like an event like reminder, and then you like edit it and then put it out there. A lot of these small tasks, I'm hoping like we can make the things that we're really going for. We all know that there's so much like random work to get to there, and I'm hoping it can like round the corners, like make the edges easier in those moments, and make it a lot like where like it's so much like kind of grunt work to like do things like community or other things or all the admin work, and maybe it can make those like a lot easier, that there is a promise of getting more into the work itself. But I'm also hesitant about that. I remember my dad would always be like, when the internet came, everyone was like, you wouldn't be working as hard. It feels like you're doing more work now. So part of me thinks this is all going to end up the same way, but I'm clear. I think we're in such a time right now, literally, when we're talking, that there's so much pressure. It's like the AI proficient, whatever that means. And it probably changes like every week. I think there is benefits to like sticking to your guns and being like, I'm going to do it how I do it, which is totally fair and real. I think it's nice to know like where it can help you too. Again, I think the problem is that we're often dealing with this blank chat box now, and it's hard to know like, how can I make that useful to me? I think if you're in like humanities, it could be a great starting place like Google is, in terms of like using deep research and you're trying to figure out a topic and you're like, research this for me for a while and then I'll come back and read that, and like let that be your first place to go down rabbit holes. I think your curiosity really is your best asset, and it won't be curious for you. Like it can search a lot of things and it is curious, it's figuring them all out. But then when you're reading something, you're like, oh, that's really interesting. Can I go deeper into that? Like you're the only one who has that North Star. And I think you should trust those instincts, and it's not going to replace them. For other things, though, like let's say you're not a designer. Let's say you're not a coder. And let's say you're not a profession of like building things and bringing them to life. These tools can be amazing for you. You can have it like generate a website for you quite quickly. And if you're like trying to start like a theater company or whatever, if it can like make that much easier and much more possible pretty quickly, and that's like awesome. Or if you were like, writing those emails that are dull or not sure you want a starting place, it's also great. I've used AI as like a bit of a thought partner, and like, I'm thinking of a lot of different content for myself, and I'm like, oh, I have this name. When you hear that, what do you think? It's just like a useful, like quick thing to bounce something on, but I am also reading all of its responses and being like, that's not tasteful. That makes no sense. There you go. And I'm using it just like, and then it will be like, that's a great idea. And sometimes I'm like, is it, or is it just being sycophantic to me, as they say? And like, I will kind of, I'm really always using my own judgment to be like, I think this is good. I don't think that's great. That's really not on theme, even if it kind of thinks it is. So I think always bring your own judgment to it. Like you do honestly with that everything, even if it's like a pretty smart thing, it's still only really, I think we have to remember, it's really only working from what's been published and what's been brought on the internet. It's not working from like felt knowledge, reading visual cues. There's really a lot that it's not working from.
In terms of the design process from where you are sitting now, within agency and also in-house, How much does emotion play into this? How much of this is defining your targets and working through with a team? And how much of this do you think is like a intuitive emotional sense?
I'm really big about intuition. I'm not as much about like everything should just be like I would often say when I was, I think in the consulting world, or I thought of it at least, that like, especially if you're in like a place where you do a lot of workshops with clients, and I do workshops now too, but it's like, they're not the answer. Though no worksheet's going to be the answer for you. It's just, it's kind of just like a starting place. And I think that always counts. Like you really have to still bring like smart thinking to anything. I'm even starting to navigate that it's good to be like a kind of process oriented or systematically oriented about like how you're getting answers or how you're bringing people into things. But I do think there's really like key moments of like intuition or like me being like, I think that idea is great intuitively, but then you're able to outline very clearly and logically why, rather than I think coming from a place of like, after you've done all the research, you're like, well, I don't really know. Like, no, you probably have a sense and you can, but like definitely think through it and see if it could be logically backed up. This is a very me thing, though, as I feel like other people will disagree with me. I once had a colleague when I was in consulting say, like, I have the Yehezkel Hard Knock School of Innovation, because I'd be like, I kind of like didn't believe in a lot of these like different brainstorming techniques, and I'm like just to go sit in a corner and think of ideas. And I still really do believe in a little bit of that. Like, I think you being a really like a good reader, thinking broadly about the world, and then coming to that perspective rather than like your first thinking about the world is with a worksheet and an agency that's curated like 3 to 5 things to inspire you. It's a better approach. But there is, I think, merit in like workshops and brainstorming techniques and whatnot. I just think like you definitely trusting your intuition and being clear and also being a good editor of your ideas. I will sometimes be like, oh, that's a good idea. But like, just because I've like killed a lot of other ideas.
Thank you for that answer. That was wonderful. Thank you. What was a project or collaboration where qualitative analysis really took the driver's seat? So I would say a time where the interviews, maybe focus groups, general observations from you and the team with people informed the results. So despite initial data or pre-existing general research.
Yeah, back when I was doing a lot of research, like in the field, as we might say, I had this project that what that looked like was a few things. We would do focus groups, like we would fly out to different locations and do focus groups there. We'd also like go into people's homes and they would like tour us through their homes or they're more comfortable and like show us them, or they'd also just be more comfortable because they're talking in their homes, or we'd sit there with like their families, which was really interesting, or their kids would like walk in. So really like that human-centered kind of like anthropological, like design work and sitting with people for like an hour and a half interview. And it was actually really interesting. It was a very new process for us because there was also like we were the qualitative research, and then there was a quant team that was like slicing and dicing the potential market opportunity. And we were kind of aligning together, like seeing what their insights were and could there was dovetail what we're hearing. And we were working for a bank that was trying to find a new market opportunity. And we were getting to different possibilities of what that could be. One was like early entrepreneurs, and we mean really, really early, like people who didn't have income coming in. And we're just like thinking about the ideas. And then one was about like young couples, or just couples in general, early, I would say like earlier couples in their, marriage or relationships. And doing a lot of qualitative research, and this could be also quant backed up, like the idea of like early entrepreneurs, they don't really have necessarily the assets to help a bank like build a business off of. You haven't even made $1 maybe, or just like making the dollar, figuring out how to make $1. But young families have a lot of things where like there's a lot of money going on, there's a lot of things happening. Or young couples, and really to get to the young couples point, like we started digging in that idea, and what qualitative work came out is that like couples couple differently today. It used to be a lot easier to think about joint accounts because it was literally like a joint. You'd be joining a man or there'd be a dependency there, or there wouldn't be, the default would be that of course we join finances. And as we were in the field and research, we saw that people were like, think about it differently. I had different kinds of couples. You had people who weren't married, were married, were many years down the line and still not married, and just different kinds of relationships and sexualities and those different dynamics. But then you also had different people because I guess of independence, where they thought about their own careers, like not necessarily like joining everything, like the full basket and putting all the eggs in the basket. They like were keeping a bit to themselves, not to like keep it away from our partners because it felt like it was security. So it really felt like there was an opportunity to create a new sense of what a joint account could be because of the different ways people were coupling. And that ended up being the concept of like, how do we make a joint account for today's couples? And that like really came out from like seeing that like couples were doing things differently, or there wasn't a homogenous sense of like what you do when you have partnership with someone.
And that was something that you'd say that the Quant team kind of took a seat and you were like, this is something that we've really diagnosed.
I think it's hard for me to remember. This is something that we felt in the qualitative side of things was very worthy. And then we ended up putting the whole idea behind there and again with like a tagline and a website and everything. I wasn't as involved in how the Quant team came behind it. I think from like a market addressable standpoint, couples and like I think the focus really became like early families when, you have both parents deep in their careers and building families. Just like, it's hard to figure out your finances when your only time to talk about them is like 10 p.m. at night when the kids are in bed and you're done thinking about, after a long work day. I'm making it easier to do that. And definitely it's like an opportunity. People are spending money. People are wanting to figure out their money. People want guidance about their money, but it seemed like a really good idea. And so I think it could be backed up by the Quant. I was less involved in that conversation, but definitely was one that is like, this is really clear that like, this is a really big, exciting insight that like people are just coupling different today. And how do we make a financial product that kind of meets them there rather than kind of having them to force how they're coupling into like these legacy tools that are kind of take them or leave them right now that can't really be fit to their unique way of how they decide to join in partnership together.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. What's your advice to a younger multidisciplinary person who is starting to build their career?
You're very sweet to say I'm multidisciplinary. I feel like I forget that sometimes. And I think it's tough just because we have like so many, the design world can be a little noisy. And I think, a few years ago it was like about becoming a specialist. Now it's really about being like a generalist, which I really like, but it's kind of hard to know where to go with it. I think it's nice if you could be in a career or part of the design world that like you get to be in a lot of conversations. So maybe you're really about being deep in the pixels and like making those final screens, but are you talking to the researchers? Are you able to be in those conversations? Are you seeing how they got to that? I mean, I think a lot of design I've learned, I remember in my first job, someone said this very wisely to me. He's like, early in your career, you're paid to solve problems, and then later you're paid to know what problems could be solved. And I would say how those problems can be solved is what you're really paid for. So, you might be a designer and someone says, okay, we have this problem and we're going to do this focus group first. And then we're going to do this workshop to figure out how to prioritize that. And then we're going to do this first design, test that and do that. Figuring out how to solve the problem is a really extraordinary skill that you don't have early in your career. And I think, but it's nice to be exposed to like all the parts of who solves them because it's easier to then figure out how you'd want to solve the problem. So me being part of like product teams where we would go out in the field and think about what kind of methods we'd be using to ask people. And we make the question sheets, the discussion guides, and then we'd be prioritizing and what techniques are we using to prioritize and all those kinds of things that can inform how we build the process. We know like what we have to solve, but the question of how we go about solving it is a big part of the puzzle. So I think it gives you a lot more tools in that. So I think if you could be a designer and maybe you're really, because you're early in your career, and let's say you want to be deep in the design world or deep in like the pixels, you're in the pixels, but can you make sure you're in conversations? Even if you're just like, can I sit down on those with like the researchers early on? Or even if you could be with your leader on the project and being like, how are you thinking about how you go about solving this project? Because you as a more junior designer coming in are just good to see like okay, here's the project plan. But it's like someone actually, and I didn't realize this until a little later, someone had to figure out that plan. And how did they think about that?
I think all these answers have been such a cool deep dive into the way that I would say would be very beneficial for a lot of people to consider. And your kind of design has such a cool mix of having the human and the cultural tool set to kind of understand how things work in that way. But then you also need to have this curiosity for research and technology and trends and new things. And how do you blend that in together? I think that's like the sweet spot. So I'm really just curious about your answer on this. You live in New York, and there's a lot of cool personalities in New York. There's a lot of people who are so passionate about art and music and culture in general and perspective and all these things. Where do you think humanities is heading? Where do you think that we're going as a society in terms of the culture of studying people and community and collective?
I've heard in the past of like thinking about content as like very nutrition dense and like less nutrition dense. I think we're starting to see like, AI slop and all those things. And I think there's always people who want to hear it and also want to share high nutrition content and insights and thoughts. And I think that's always going to be, it's not like we're like, well, ChatGPT is so much better than the New Yorker, and people are not going to get the New Yorker. Or like we see the rise of Substack, I think is really amazing. And so many people who maybe wouldn't be published in certain pages can just show that they have an extraordinary voice on their own. And it's interesting, every trend there's a counter trend. It seems like we're in an era where like people are really sharing an individual voice and can do it in such a rich way. And like where Substack provides that, we're finding a lot of new human experiences because of AI. And the reporting of them, I think, is wildly rich. And I think there's going to be a lot to figure out there. In the Times a few weeks ago, they had an article that I found like wildly striking to me because it was about people talking about their like romantic-ish relationships with an AI. And what I thought was interesting is two things. One, that there were people who were not anonymous in this article in the Times. The Times is a huge publication. I would see maybe people getting non-anonymous people in maybe smaller, more boutique publications, but in such a mainstream one, I was like shocked people would go public. So that just showed a certain acceptance of themselves, that they're like fine with that. And then two, that it was almost like I felt like we were seeing like a new sexuality or attachment style that I wasn't seeing, that like not a lot of these people had a partner and their partner was even okay with this. And they weren't like seeing it as a replacement, but they saw it as like an AI could provide the more constancy, I guess, that like it could always be there for you and their partner couldn't, or understand what they were going through in ways. Like it seemed like a new thing being brought into lives that partners right away weren't seen as compromising, like another human. It's like, you're replacing me, but they were okay with it. It was sitting in another world. And I just found that fascinating. And I think I think the whole world of AI and how it exists with them is posing a new set of things to research and delve deeply into about how we're existing as humans right now, for better or for worse. I think we're actually going to be probably surprised that like we're still going to be going to movies. We're not going to be like that into like AI pop stars or like AI authors. We're still going to want like what humans give us. And like, even if there's a world where we're kind of happy with AI authorship, I think some of the biggest YouTube channels right now are like AI things. I think we'll constantly want what people are making and like the story behind them making it and the interviews. You think about Wicked and like the interview circuit of like the Wicked actresses, and like that's not going to exist if AI is like never going to be on an interview circuit. We like for this rich cultural experience. So I think in some ways we're being challenged about how we're changing because of it, but I think we're always going to want what we ourselves as people provide, and I think that richness will not ever be matched.
Yehezkel, thank you so much for chatting with us today.
And of course, this is so fun.
Thanks for watching this episode. I really hope you enjoyed listening, and I hope this sparks some new conversations in your day-to-day. Please subscribe to get more of these, and you can always get in touch through the email below. I'm Nathan with PHOR. Thanks again.